It's time for Southern Fried Baseball, presented by College Baseball Central. Hosted by Jake McKeever as he talks everything SEC baseball and more.
Welcome in, College Baseball Central fans. As we approach the final day of the season, I called in the bullpen help for one of the most polarizing teams in the country, Olivia from Dogs 247, here to talk about probably the most talked about team in the country at this point, the Georgia Bulldogs. Olivia, how are we feeling today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm really enjoying this fake spring that was going on in Georgia this past week. Unfortunately, it looks like it's back to 30-degree raining, but so excited for baseball. I know Georgia's eager. I know the fans are eager, and I cannot wait to get it started on Friday.
Before we jump into team stuff, Georgia, it seems like they opened up that new facility. What can you kind of tell us about that? Have you got a chance to go in there yet?
Yeah, so they haven't done any tours yet, but just looking at the field, looking at the new seating area, right field, the pitching lab from the outside, it looks really good. And I know they're not done yet. They said it should still be done before opening day for Georgia, or Georgia's opening home game, which would be February 20th. But the turf looks really nice. The players seem to love it too. They said it's going to be easier to catch the hops on the balls. It's going to be easier to tell where it's going to go off the bat. So I think it's really good.
It's exciting stuff. It's definitely the best time to be a Georgia baseball fan. Obviously, building off what they had last year with Charlie Condon as the Golden Spikes winner, it feels like this team's a little bit better. Is that kind of weird to say?
No, I don't think so. Trey Phelps actually said the other day that although they're not going to have a Charlie Condon, they're not going to have a guy hit 40 bombs in a year, he thinks the team's actually going to hit more home runs than it did last season, which looking just 1 through 9, I think it's a lot more deep than it was last season. I think you have a lot more guys. Wes Johnson said they practically moneyballed it, where they went out and got a bunch of guys that together can replicate that production.
I'm going to read some of their rankings just because they are all over the place. Georgia in D1s is 8. Perfect Game has them at 4. National College Baseball Writers Association has them at 13. Baseball America at 11. And then we have them at 12. Do you think 4 is a little bit too high? 12 is a little bit too low? Where do you kind of have this Georgia team?
Yeah, I was a little surprised to see them at 4, especially, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Tennessee was behind around 5-ish or 6-ish.
Tennessee is at 5.
Yeah, that definitely surprised me. I think there's a lot of hype around this program. I think it's well-deserved. I would have them closer to 8 to 10 range just because we were talking about a little bit off camera, the talent in this league, the talent in the SEC is off the charts.
It really is kind of an embarrassment of riches. And we'll talk about some of the lineups coming up here. But Georgia, like many of these SEC teams, there seems to be 12, 13, 14 guys that could easily slide in. Let's go ahead and start with kind of the returning guys. Hunter Henry behind the plate, Slade Alford at third, Colby Branch at short, and then obviously the new Charlie Condon, if you will, Trey Phelps. Who's going to take it over that leadership role that Charlie had last year?
Yeah, so I'm going to go to 2 guys. You mentioned one of them, Henry Hunter. He's supposed to get a lot of reps behind the plate. I know they brought in Daniel Jackson, but Wes Johnson really seems to like Hunter. And he actually mentioned that if he doesn't make it in this league, he could be governor. So really good leadership style there. He was elected captain for the Red and Black World Series in fall. And the other captain was actually Nolan McCarthy, who transferred over from Kentucky, has that Omaha experience. He's a guy that both Wes Johnson and multiple players have pointed to as just the vocal leader of the team. And we spoke with Nolan McCarthy a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned he came in on the quieter side. He didn't want to step on anyone's toes. But he actually said once he started hitting off of Georgia's pitchers, he knew he could be vocal. So he's really a guy that stepped up. The guys respect him. Slade Alford actually said they needed a little bit of that Kentucky-style ball within the Bulldogs. But him and Henry Hunter are the 2 guys I'm looking for.
On Monday, you mentioned McCarthy saw a ton of similarities between the Kentucky team last year and this team. Mm-hmm. What do you kind of see? Or did he kind of touch on that a little bit further?
Yeah, he mainly touched on the belief. He said the teams that don't believe are not going to get far in the postseason. Once again, we were talking about it a little bit before we started, but this Georgia team, that's something that Wes Johnson has really instilled within it. I don't think they'll probably say it was, but I don't think it was present before he got here. I mean, you look at it, you're 29, 27, a couple games over 500. Wes Johnson comes in, so many new guys on the roster, just getting them to gel together and really telling them. I remember the team released a video back in February of 2024, I think it was. And it was just him saying, do y'all actually think you can get to Omaha? Because I do. And I really think he got that team believing.
Yeah, it did kind of feel like that, especially in that super regional, as they played a really, really talented team. Just kind of ran out of outs, it seemed like, and a lot of our ACC folks probably don't see it that way. It really is kind of crazy to see how much the profile of this Georgia team has changed. They lose their best player, and they're instantly talked about, top 5 in the nation. Big reason for that is the transfers. I guess we'll start in the outfield. Devin Obi didn't go through fall camp. How has he kind of adjusted with this team as being there only in the spring?
Yeah, he's been great. I definitely think he's going to be at one of the corner outfield positions. You look at his stats, they're off the charts. I believe he batted slightly over 300, lots of homers, might have even had an inside the park home run, or that might have been Robbie Burnett. But nonetheless, really big bat. And the thing that stood out to Wes Johnson was his glove. He mentioned that Obi, McCarthy, and Robbie Burnett could potentially be the best outfield in the league just solely on their defensive ability.
I remember that because he said that all 3 of them had center field experience at previous places. The guy, again, that we looked to be there is the center fielder, Nolan McCarthy. But again, Obi and Robbie Burnett can play there. Baseball America has Robbie Burnett as a second baseman. D1 has him as an outfielder. That really kind of speaks to the versatility that Wes has kind of built on this. If you were to make a prediction right now, do you think he'd start more games at second base or in the outfield? Because we know he's going to start at both.
That's a good question. I would say it's going to depend on how Ryan Black's doing, because I think they brought Ryan Black in to be that second baseman, but he's sort of going through a bit of a hand injury right now. Wes Johnson compared it to what Corey Collins went through last season, where I believe he missed opening weekend and then played a couple of the games against Kentucky, but wasn't able to be a full go until a little bit midway into the season. So if Ryan Black recovers well, I do think we see Burnett a lot in the outfield. If he doesn't, and it takes him some time, I think we definitely see him starting off at second base, but I think he'll get majority of his time in the outfield.
And then obviously Trey Phelps is the headliner from a lineup standpoint. 353 last year, freshman All-American by D1. Do you think he plays more in the field this year, or do you think that he stays kind of in that DH role that he had last year?
Yeah, I think he goes more in the field, definitely. We spoke with him as well a couple weeks ago, and he said he's going to play all over the place. And then Wes Johnson said he's going to play the best right-handed batter's box potentially in the league. But one thing he touched about, he's got all the gloves. He's working out all the different positions. So I think we could see him, honestly, probably anywhere except for behind the plate.
He really does kind of feel like a Charlie Condon, because we saw that where he played third, first, center. I think that we could kind of see something similar with Trey Phelps. Moving on kind of into the rotation, Colton Smith, Leighton Finley, and JT Quinn as the number 3 coming over from Ole Miss. It feels like they have 3 guys that would be great in a Saturday role. Who's kind of separated themselves into that Friday night role? Yeah,
from the outside perspective, it seems to be Colton Smith. I mean, you look at almost all the lists, he's up there. The thing with Colton is, in my opinion, he needs to get out of his head. He's an excellent pitcher. The strikeout stuff is there. I saw a stat the other day, I wrote it down, that his cutter had a 49% chase rate and 43% swing and miss last season, which is great for a college pitcher. But the problem where he went wrong is where he would let an inning spiral. We saw it in NC State. One thing went wrong, a couple errors. He lasts like 1.1 innings. So he's mentioned that he's worked with a mental strength coach a little bit during the offseason just to really isolate each inning and not let one mistake carry over. Aside from him, I think Leighton Finley is going to come back a lot stronger. He really developed into that potential Saturday starter, Friday if it's a series that starts on Thursday as well. And then for that 3 position, I think you're looking at Zach Harris, the guy that's returning. A guy that Wes Johnson pointed to was Zach Brown. He's from Ohio State, and he just mentioned that he's been excellent during fall and spring, and he's fighting for that starting role. You mentioned JT Quinn, and then how will Charlie Goldstein come back is the other big question.
Yeah, they are still pending on announcements around him and Alberto Ozuna at Tennessee. Last I heard on that is that Tennessee feels like Ozuna's going to be good. So if Ozuna's good, yes. Goldstein's good. You mentioned Smith, Finley, and Harris. They're all guys with super, super high ERAs, but the numbers around their strikeouts are really, really good. Who do you expect to kind of take over and be in that bullpen role in case some of these guys kind of get into trouble?
Yeah, so Wes Johnson mentioned that Alton Davis is actually being stretched out as a starter, but I do think we eventually see him slide back into that bullpen. You look at what he did with Alabama last season, led the team in saves. He closed USA Baseball Collegiate National Team's no-hitter over the summer. Doesn't get much bigger than that. So I think he's going to be a guy that they really rely on in that bullpen. And then the other guy I am super excited to watch is Brian Curley. He's the transfer from VCU. I believe his ERA was like 2.87. I know it was less than 3 last season, but 78 strikeouts and 78.1 innings means his stuff is there. So I think he's going to be a guy that they really rely on. And then you look at the others coming back, Brian Zeldin, Charlie Goldstein, depending on his injury, stuff like that.
You mentioned Brian Curley, 2.87 ERA with 3 saves, was kind of in that flex role for VCU. I think that's kind of where he'll be at Georgia too as well. The schedule in the SEC is always tough for Georgia. Which one is your series of the year, you think, for Georgia?
That's a very good question. There's so many. Like, you even look at non-conference. You got Georgia Tech, you got Clemson, which will both be good. Starting off the season at UNC Wilmington, a rematch of last year's super regional super was NC State. But conference-wise, the big one I'm looking at, if you want to be the best, you have to be the best. And Texas A&M, the Aggies come to Athens for the final series of the regular season. I think it's going to be a big one. I think the crowd's going to show out for that one, and I'll be interested to see how it plays out.
Yeah, that could be one where Georgia's fighting to be in the host conversation or even in that super regional conversation. So that's definitely going to be one. It seems like A&M's last weekend's always really big because last year they had Arkansas. So it's cool to see kind of the new up-and-comer Georgia coming in. Lastly, as we are kind of running short on time here, I've seen Omaha or bust. I've seen this. Where do you think Georgia finishes in the SEC? And then do you think they're a host?
Ooh, that's a good question. So where I think they finish in the SEC, there's so many different things that could play into account. I do think looking at it on paper is one thing. How it actually plays out is another. I think it's hard to beat A&M, Arkansas, and Tennessee with potentially LSU, Florida, and a couple other teams. So I'd have them finishing in that 4 through 6 range. I do think they end up being a national seed, a host, a super regional host. I just think you look at this team compared to last team. Yes, you're missing Charlie Condon, Corey Collins, Fernando Gonzalez, all the other guys, but it just has so much depth. One thing Colton Smith mentioned is that 18 to 20 guys are already hitting 95 miles an hour in the pitching staff. So I think the pitching is going to be a lot deeper. I think the offense is going to be a lot deeper. And I think if this team can cohesively gel, there's no reason why it's not a host.
Yeah, it is a plus staff. Average in the SEC is 93, which is absolutely wild. So they do have a bunch of guys that are above average. Olivia, I'm sure we'll connect up next time Georgia has a really, really big weekend. I really appreciate you coming on. And for Southern Fried Baseball, thanks everybody for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.